The Witch, Months of Cold, Year 2. The witch who called herself Mildred caught a falling snowflake in the palm of her hand, holding it steadily to her face before crunching it beneath her fingers. Her eyes were narrow and suspicious, constantly looking to the sky above.
It seems there will be no easy travel for us. No sunlight, this season.
Before Lorelei had a chance to respond, Dennis screamed ineffectively and made several rude gestures towards the sky.
Stupid cold, stupid snow, stupid everything. Gah! I hate it all.
Fuming, the lumbering form of Dark Lord Dennis punted at the snow with his trunk-like legs, trying to kick away the first flakes as they fell upon the ground.
What's the point of traveling with 1.5 witches when you nerds can't even properly predict the temperature? I hate the cold. How are going to even live like this?
Lorelei had been steadily watching the snowfall as the Dark Lord ranted and raved. There wasn't much of it, and the snow was ashen, almost more soot than ice. But there was enough for her purpose. The snowball whizzed through the air and Lorelei felt pleased with her own marksmanship as it bounced harmlessly off the back of the Dark Lord's head. Wheeling around with anger, Dennis ran towards her, and continued to scream and swear despite his inability to catch up. Eventually the Dark Lord ran out of breath and Lorelei rolled to a stop, grinning.
Come on, Dennis. It's just snow. And not much of it at that. I mean, even if it gets worse, we'll think of something. Where's your sense of adventure? Adventure can go so. Harumph. Kindling, don't be so foolhardily optimistic.
Mildred floated behind them at a slow pace, paying only the tiniest amount of attention to her protégé and source of manual labor, as her expression only grew darker.
For once, I am inclined to agree with Dennis. Things will get worse, and soon. But it is not the cold you need fear, Dark Lord. Other things will likely fleece the cells from your skin before then.
Laughing at Dennis' immediate discomfort, Mildred muttered something under her breath. The cool air took shape, becoming a crude bird such as a child might draw, and fluttering to the winds.
Is it really that bad?
Lorelei asked cautiously. She had been feeling so optimistic of late, and the snow had actually lifted her spirits. She couldn't remember the last time snow had fallen in the yards. It had, of course, but automated defense systems that possessed pinpoint accuracy and no ability to isolate targets constantly kept up a stream of anti-air fire that managed never to hit whatever called the skies home. The smog had been bad, really bad. Some people seemed to think they could avoid it by going underground, but she had never heard much of the groups that went off to pursue those rumors. But snow? Actual snow.
For Dennis, mayhap. You will learn to ignore the weather, Kindling. The only thing that it truly affects is your ability to know the environment, to know the exhaustion of water, desperate to become ice, or the fearful teeth of the unchained winds. These two are things you can shape, should you continue your practice.
Practice had begun in serious recently, Mildred regularly forcing Lorelei to do a variety of activities that seemed to have little to no relation to anything, especially anything magical, at least at first. Categorizing and thinking of new names for the hairs on Dennis' back, rolling in place while Mildred sat cross-legged in the dirt, watching her critically, juggling. Mildred had at least had the good sense not to let that one go any further. But Lorelei had been thinking about everything that the witch had told her, and realized that what she was trying to do was find something to spark off whatever magic, if any, lay within Lorelei. So she had began devising things to do on her own, almost obsessively. At first it had just been uprooting soil and replanting it while the other two slept. Sometimes she wasn't sure that either really did, much to her chagrin. That hadn't felt at all right to her, though, the digging, not the weirdness of two vaguely humanish companions who didn't sleep. So she had tried organizing her belongings, talking to insects, thinking about the patterns of leaves, counting the stars. And that had suddenly felt right. She couldn't describe why, but she just knew that there was something about it that made sense to her. The rest of the night, Lorelei had tried to remember star charts and nautical names and mythology that some of the penitent types had burbled about when they came with food and proselytizing glee. It had been so engaging she had managed not to notice Mildred, right by her side, watching with approval, which, admittedly, had been more than a little jarring. Just a little. But so had begun her serious practice, and every night, she felt she understood a bit more of what she was trying to do, even though she still didn't understand what that was, or what its purpose was.
Right. Well, about food and water. You two will have to find those yourselves. In such abominable conditions, I do not feel tea or pastries are appropriate.
Dennis snorted under his breath, and began trying to gather enough snow for his own projectile. Though he clumsily gathered some at first, it began to drift out of his fingertips as the Dark Lord, bent over and dumbstruck, stared at something in the distance.
Guys, we have a problem.
It was unusual to hear Dennis say something like that. It was the closest he'd probably get to openly asking for help. Lorelei rolled towards him as Dennis scrabbled to his feet and hid behind her while still trying to look intimidating, though Lorelei noticed he was too unnerved to scream, which bothered her even more. Mildred, of course, had once again vanished. The ruin-dotted hills, now covered with a glazing of grey snow, unfolded before them, and walking towards them, slowly and with a noticeable set of bandages, was an older man, a smaller purple humanoid, and a harpy. Lorelei mused that the sentence wouldn't make a bad opener for a joke, but kept her eyes on them. It was clear they'd come from sort of trauma. The harpy had incredibly piercing and active eyes, but her rich red coat was tarnished from the snow and numerous other stains and cuts. Her feathers drooped noticeably, their plumage itself looking as if it had begun to run out of color. The humanoid seemed to be a bit less worse for wear, though he was nursing a pretty bad case of a bruised eye. He also seemed deeply skittish, constantly glancing from them to the older man and saying numerous quick things that didn't carry towards them on the wind. As for the older man, he had clearly mended his clothes with great care and patience, as well as set several bones. The red of his jacket had mixed with the brownish color of actual blood, long since dried, though he carried himself with a poise and cheerfulness that indicated he walked out of the confrontation all the better. And that made Lorelei nervous, though not so much as Dennis' whispered comment.
I think I know that guy.
Now close enough that running wasn't an easy option, Lorelei gave a cursory nod of acknowledgement towards the Dark Lord, wishing she knew a way to reassure him that she'd look after him, even if it was just this once. The Dark Lord was visibly sweating from behind his glasses, though otherwise doing his own best to appear detached. The old man waved, smiling, and Lorelei smiled back, though she didn't wave. Rolling towards the group, Lorelei pulled into the shade of a large tree whose branches not only held the snow in check, but looked oddly like pulled cotton.
Good afternoon, travelers. How fortunate we are to have company upon the road. Are you two making a pilgrimage today? What is it called? Jungle Shrine, as well. We weren't planning on it, but that sounds nice.
Lorelei responded to the old man without any clue of what the Jungle Shrine was in particular. Her expression was neutral enough for him not to notice, however, all the more the way his attention kept alighting to Dennis with a quizzical glee.
Of course. But forgive me my manners, I'm Leopold, and these are my associates, Mr. Mammon and the Duchess Crimsolino. Due to our domain having come under attack recently, we were out to investigate the jungle in the hope its protector might provide some aid.
The one known as Mammon managed a weak grin at some prompting from Leopold, who frowned so quickly that Lorelei wasn't sure if his lips had moved, or it had just been a ferocity in his eyes.
Yeah, we kinda got wrecked. It could have been worse though, all things considered. Aha! I'm sure the jungle'll be a good place to be instead of an unheated tower, too. Lots of leaves and vines and stuff. Being a jungle. Not sounding very enthused there, Mr. Mammon.
Lorelei placed her hands against her knees and smiled kindly to the demon, who looked away.
Is the snow wearing you down?
Leopold looked like he wanted to interrupt, but a surprisingly husky voice erupted from the harpy. Lorelei thought she sounded really cool, but devastatingly sad. Like a once famous actor who had descended from the public grace, perhaps.
Oh, girl. The snow has worn us all down, as you can surely see. I used to frolic quite happily amongst the clouds, when there were clouds and not a mass of grey like the depressively monolithic covers above. And besides,
raising a red wing to its impressive span and pulling it around Lorelei so that the young woman felt shielded by it, and hidden from the worries of Dennis and the eyes of others, the great bird spoke quietly and with unshakable authority.
Such is the natural state of those as the world falls to ruin.
Withdrawing her wings with a slight sniff and an odd shuffle of her feathers, the Duchess took to the air, exhaling fire and a horrendous cry, then immediately set to circling above them, almost out of sight entirely.
My, so dramatic, our little bird.
Leopold smiled, grinding his knuckles into the back of Mammon's head. Lorelei's eyes widened, but she carefully said nothing, and the rage died out from the old man soon enough. His eyes going back towards Dennis once again.
That demon of yours. Is he, by any chance, for sale?
His comment caught Lorelei off of her guard, and she suddenly felt much colder than the relatively warm temperature that allowed for the snow to fall around them. The tree above shook from the mild breeze, releasing some of the ashen snow down amongst them as Lorelei shook her head, trying to still sound polite.
No, I'm pretty reliant on him.
An idea came to her quickly, and she admired its pragmatism even as she felt strange for saying it. The words slipping from her mouth even as her eyes shone with a mischief she wasn't entirely sure she felt.
What about yours?
Leopold blinked twice, then began to laugh, slapping his side as if she had said the most uproarious thing imaginable. Maybe she had, or maybe her unease with the comment had been entirely too obvious. Lorelei didn't know, and the old man wasn't telling.
Oh, goodness, no. I'm afraid I would be completely helpless without my two dear friends here, and the idea of selling them is quite abhorrent to me at this juncture. Nevertheless, you have a fine head on your shoulders. All the pity you aren't headed towards the jungle yourself. If the jungle's so good, why don't you marry it?
Dennis interjected, the comment falling flat as he blushed a peculiar shade of embarrassment. At least Mammon was laughing. Lorelei resisted the urge to ask the Dark Lord to remain quiet until the conversation was over, smoothing over the bemusement on the face of Leopold by re-railing the question.
So, what's in the jungle that's so cool, anyhow? Is this protector magical or something like that?
Responding with an inexpressive shrug of his shoulders, Leopold replied curtly.
One cannot say. I do know that this recent spate of ill weather seems to be tied to the protector's displeasure. I think an ancient enemy of some kind may be afoot. Indeed, if you aren't headed to the jungle yourself, it might all the best for you to go look for this enemy, perhaps. I hear tell he sleeps deep beneath the earth, that his breath is toxin and his eyes are hatred, and that when he moves, the earth boils. Sounds like a nice guy.
She responded dryly, once again watching the sarcasm whiz past Leopold, though Mammon had stopped laughing enough to grin.
Could be. I'd recommend avoiding anyone who sleeps that long. Chances are they're pretty cranky, and let's be honest. The boss is just letting you know that if you're in the area, you should keep an eye open. Right, boss? Of course.
Leopold smiled from ear to ear, no trace of anything but a warm and genteel kindness on his face.
Of course.
A few seconds passed where no one said anything. Lorelei whistled, crossed her arms, and uncrossed them, then finally made up her mind. Bowing her head politely, and adjusting her hat as it nearly fell from her brow, she said.
Look, it's been real fun and really fun, but a colleague is waiting somewhere up ahead, so if you don't mind.
The old man nodded, and with a sigh of relief from Dennis, the two turned to leave, it not mattering in what direction, so long as it was away from the awkward silence. It was just as they'd almost left the cover of the tree above that Lorelei felt a hand shoot out against her arm. Stronger than its age would suggest, its grip like iron or bone.
Wait a minute, child. You wouldn't happen to be a wizard of some kind, would you?
Lorelei swallowed slowly, feeling the air around her. Cool and impersonal.
Maybe. Something a little like that. Why do you ask?
To her relief, Leopold let go of her arm, though she imagined pushing forward might have been enough to break free elsewise. Though his grip was strong, the old man was not only old, but clearly still recovering from whatever wounds had been inflicted upon him, if the heavy way he drew breath was any indication.
No real reason. I myself practice some magic, and I was simply wondering if you would be interested in a few lessons, from one new friend to another.
His smile and enthusiasm seemed genuine enough that Lorelei almost wanted to accept, but shook her head politely.
Thanks for the offer. Maybe some other time. Good luck with your journey into the jungle.
This time, she didn't stop to wait for a response, ushering Dennis forward with a glance as the two left. Leopold didn't seem to mind, but she could hear him speaking repeatedly to Mammon as they left. The same phrase several times over, though what the phrase was quickly became distorted on the rising wind, the only constant the way the word like seemed to be repeated again and again. Neither she nor Dennis spoke directly as they traveled, even though moving through the rising snow, now several inches in height, did seem to be fatiguing Dennis more quickly than usual, and she occasionally found herself stuck in the snow, hesitating for a moment before pushing forward with a fear and confusion she had felt missing since she first arrived to the island.
"Come on, Lorelei,"
she whispered to herself, and was surprised as the words didn't come out like that. She wasn't even sure what she said, but it hurt slightly to listen to, and where the sound was the snow pulled recoiled from her path as if terrified. Crackles of something blue that might have been electricity nipping along the ground.
Geez, is your voice malfunctioning too, now?"
Dennis said dismissively, courage renewed by the distance between them and Leopold. Lorelei slowly shook her head, trying to hide her excitement and confusion, then realized there was something unsaid as they made their way through the snow, now moving away from wheel and foot alike.
"So, Leopold, you know him?" "I don't know him precisely, but guys like that, they're kind of obvious, right? Losers who sit in big attics throwing salt on the floor and summoning up innocent demons to chop up with carving knives or something like that. Demonologists, is what I'm saying." The word, and that level of description, hadn't quite occurred to me, but I see where you're coming from. He wasn't. I didn't like the way he treated his friends.
For a minute, Dennis looked like he wanted to reply with an attempt at a cutting comment, but swallowed and nodded.
"Yeah, you do treat us better. It's weird, given that you didn't choose Mildred or I as companions, right?" "Well, I don't think that matters, honestly. Wouldn't that kind of defeat what I said earlier?"
Dennis seemed to have grappled onto a point however, and refused to let it go with the tenacity of someone who thinks they've stumbled upon a hidden and vital truth.
"But that's the thing. If you can just stumble in here, can't other people? The sort of scrub that doesn't play to win, but just to wreck other people's game. Can you imagine what that sort of guy would do if he found this protector thing?" "That's awfully perceptive, Dennis." Whatever."
Not sure if she should clarify that it was a compliment, Lorelei tried to think back to the warning Crimsolino had given her, and was shocked as Mildred half hovered half jumped from a tree branch in front of them, landing several inches above the snow.
"Spare not any feelings for that accursed creature. She drew her own fate, long ago. Aside that, I am pleased with your progress, Kindling. Your situation is not entirely hopeless." "What, no praise for me? Lame." "Oh, I have praise for you. I have missed the delicate timbre of your voice and your ability to serve as the second most comfortable pillow I have ever laid mine eyes upon."
Mildred's ghoulish laughter rang around the three of them as Dennis put his hands over his ears and groaned in exasperation.
"Though once again I wished you had stuck around, thanks."
Lorelei couldn't stay mad, even if she wanted to, and even if she especially wanted to ask if her concern about the harpy had been so obvious, and why Mildred was so aggressive towards her, when the prospect of someone appreciating her first tenuous step into witchdom was so cool.
"Did you see it, then?" "I saw some snow that had grown exhausted of the prattling of a grown man-child and a young pup still playing with the fire in her words, but I suppose that is something nonetheless." "Thanks, teacher."
Lorelei smiled at the backhanded praise that Mildred was so fond of, and the witch replied with a grumble and several half-materialized canisters of mysteriously unlabeled beverages. They were lukewarm, and looked oddly like the kind of drinks the military would distribute to the yards after a triumph. Dennis grabbed his out of the air, cracked it open, the canister made a sad little hiss as he did, and chugged it in one gulp, then cracked the can and threw it into the air. Both Mildred and Lorelei shot the Dark Lord a look, and he sighed before grabbing the can and placing it in his pocket. It was during that time that Lorelei saw a mixture of plastic figurines and what looked to be cards of some kind. She desperately wanted to ask what they were for, but decided it probably wasn't the right time, and that she probably wasn't that brave.
"So then, Kindling, I think our next task,"
Mildred began, purposely trailing off as Lorelei interrupted.
We need to investigate the jungle, I think. I don't really want to interact with those guys again, but at the same time I don't really think anything Leopold does seems really safe. Anyone who can talk about buying someone else right in front of that person.
Lorelei tapped her finger against the canister, not sure if the weirdly dry taste of the soda within was to her liking.
Fair enough. Do be warned that the man is indeed a danger, as are his compatriots. Do not mistake the ability to be charming with the ability to win the loyalty of others. For when one is viewed as a friend, it is not a few words that wins those who have seen cheer and tragedy to your side.
Lorelei sighed and stared up into the grey milieu of the sky above. It writhed, and the stars were only occasionally visible through it.
I know that. But that's why. If I were in danger, you and Dennis would look out for me, even without our meeting being predetermined, right?
Dennis snorted, which was fine. But to Lorelei's surprise, Mildred hesitated.
I would like to say I would, yes. But there is no force compelling me to do so. Nor even if I decided that I would, can I guarantee that I will always be able to. The world is not always so kind as that, kindling.
Lorelei relaxed a little, smiling wryly.
That's fine, Mildred. I know that much, at least.
Mildred raised an eyebrow, but chose not respond, drinking her beverage in peace.
Yo, mean green witch, time for another soda.
Dennis clapped his hands and shattered whatever attempts at thought Lorelei had been struggling to maintain. She wheeled in place and opened her mouth to speak, but Mildred seemed quite content as an equally mysterious and different beverage appeared above the confused Dennis, and rocked towards him at high speeds, enough to knock him to the ground. It was also very shook up when the Dark Lord popped the drink open, but too flat to even make a good foam. And though Lorelei had not been used to fresh food, she wasn't sure that it was possible for carbonated and heavily salted water to smell that rancid.
Your decision is noted, and wise to an extent,
Mildred replied, pointedly facing away from the glowering, but still drinking, Dennis. Her expression was entirely serious, no trace of pride or cruel glee on her lips.
But we will be traveling backwards, and they will likely be waiting for us. I would heavily recommend going around, through a certain heavily canopied forest to the north of here. It will take more time, and we may not be the first to arrive, but we will be able to do so silently, and without detection.
The snow had stopped falling now, and the weather was as clear as it would be. A redness behind the clouds might have been the sun's falling, or something else entirely. Lorelei chose not to speculate on it and instead gave a curt nod of her head.
Yeah. Let's do that. If we get there after the old man breaks something, we'll just have to fix it, I guess. Is it our task to fix all ruin, now?
Mildred spoke quietly. Lorelei's eyes shone as she responded, lips set.
Not our task, now. But I want to know what that guy's thinking, and if something threatens this place, yeah. I want to fix it.
Pausing, she added with a smile.
And of course, if you want to go back home at any time, Mildred, me and the Dark Lord will be glad to keep on hoofing it alone. Though, I can't imagine you would want to miss out on whatever happens next.
A ghost of a grin returned to Mildred's face.
Yes, I suppose there is that, isn't there? Well. Consider my objections redacted, at least for now. Yes. For now. I suppose we watch the sky and wait, do we not?
Lorelei had started noticing them, now. Lean animals, short and low to the ground like wolves, but without anything like the canine maws of those animals. 3 pairs of legs, each set with pronged feet that could dig into the freshly fallen snow, and boar-like snouts from above which sunken eyes watched the 3 pass with barely concealed hunger. Dennis made a half-hearted roar and threw a rock at one, which darted off. Then the rest did as well, though Lorelei was no longer blind to the eyes watching from behind a snow-encrusted trunk, or the back of a large rock, or under their feet, concealed by warrens in the dirt and snow. The wind howled mournfully as she pulled her sweater around her, and tried to remember where the stars had been last night, but the cold was distracting as the night settled amongst them, cold and biting, and as they made a hasty camp and fire flickered to life amongst them, its flames seemed a solitary comfort against the months of cold that lay ahead. Chapter End.